Was going with DFDS a good decision for Jersey? Well, let's find out in this conversation. And I just want to say right from the beginning that I'm not affiliated with any of the candidates in the coming elections. I just want to have a conversation about this topic, that's been quite hot, for the past a year and a half or so. But I'm not a journalist. I'm not a person, that's highly skilled, in asking questions. It's just having a regular conversation. If you feel like you can do this better, just do it. If you have any further questions, leave them in the comments below, and hopefully Kirsten will be able to get back to you. Second time having you here, and I remember last time when we talk about primarily hospitality, we also touch on DFDS and Condor and the situation at the time. And since then, a lot happened.
Yes.
That was probably like 2 years ago, 2 years or something ago. You were excited at the time, that this first time ever, I think, that Jersey and Guernsey are going together into this. And it makes sense. I think it makes sense at the time. And, that was the beginning stages to do this together, because you feel like, we all very together in many, many aspects of businesses across the islands working together. Sometimes the government's working together, and we are close to as Channel Islands. So that didn't really go as planned. It's fair to say.
It didn't, sadly, no. And genuinely, sadly, it didn't go as planned.
Yeah.
And, I have to say that Jersey was put in a situation by Guernsey unilaterally made its decision and then let Jersey kind of try to sort it out at our end. And that put us in a very difficult situation, because through that joint tender process, both Condor had failed and separately DFDS had failed. And so there wasn't an ability from Jersey's perspective to be able to appoint either operator at that point. But Guernsey made it very difficult, or actually effectively refused to talk. And they made a decision, and it put Jersey in a very difficult situation. And, unfortunately, and the Royal Court does state this, the Royal Court has said Guernsey ended the joint tender process. And that's a huge shame, and it's still a matter of regret.
Since then, I've been to Guernsey because I go with work every now and then.
Yeah.
And, the taxi drivers, some of them, they just like to talk. And one of the things one of the taxi drivers says, and I quote, was, "Sometimes it's better to go with the devil you know," and I end quote. And I just want to ask, did Jersey choose the lesser of two evils?
Neither ferry company is evil. Let's start there. So there were actually three ferry companies in the first tender process. There was Irish Ferries as well. So there was Irish Ferries, Condor Ferries, and DFDS. And there is a reality, which is that Irish Ferries went out at the first round, which was in July, and actually Condor Ferry should have been out then as well. They had failed at that point too, but because of the concern around obviously peak of the tourist season, you don't want to lose your boat services in July. And that was the reason they were kept in the race, was effectively to make sure that tourist season, 2024, I think it would have been, wasn't affected. And, but they had failed at that point previously as well. So yeah, both ferry companies are decent ferry companies. We were worried, when I talk about Brittany Ferries was a decent ferry company. Condor Ferries, and I think this is a point that is forgotten a lot, Condor Ferries sent Jersey and Guernsey a letter in later part of 2023, which said, you need to pay us £40 million, £10 million by the end of the month, or we will not be able to guarantee services. And that, caused huge concern, because before the ferries take us as passengers, taking us off these shores or bringing people to these shores, their most important function is bringing Jersey's food and supplies, and obviously Guernsey's as well. 90% of our food comes by ferry. So we cannot afford to have a ferry service which sends a letter out of the blue. They hadn't given us any suggestion that there was any financial problems. We had asked, and they'd continually said, finance is fine. To send us suddenly out of the blue a letter demanding £40 million, £10 million by the end of the month, is horrific and a massive concern. That then caused the issues around, one, we had to get contingency. Both islands spent between them £5 million on contingency, because we had to make sure that the ferry company, if it went bust, that we were still able to bring supplies to these shores. And Condor also didn't tell us, and I think this is unforgivable, that they had court action against them by one of the other ports that they serve, and their vessels, their fleet, were under court action at the time, and they hadn't informed Jersey or Guernsey that they had a court action against them, and their vessels were not far away from being impounded in other ports. And it was a genuine risk that had those ports decided to call in that court action and use it, they could have impounded Condor's vessels with very little notice at all. So there were genuine, critical concerns around our supply chains at that time in 2023. And unfortunately, we weren't being kept in the picture by Condor.
So I can see a lot of pressure building up because of all the issues along the way that the government noticed, that you noticed, or whoever noticed, with Condor. But other than that pressure, that you've seen, was there pressure, let's say, from France? Because obviously we know that our biggest connection, I wouldn't say brothers, but is the UK. But after that, our connection with Europe is through France. Was there pressure from there to let Condor go further in this process?
Condor, throughout all this process, we've got to remember, Brittany Ferries bought 25% of Condor in 2019, and they had a person, the CEO of Brittany Ferries was on the Condor board of directors. And so that was the case, when they had this court action against them, which they didn't tell us about. Brittany Ferries were involved with Condor at that time. There's no doubt that through the tender process, there was lobbying. I wouldn't call it necessarily inappropriate. There was one day I remember where it got close to inappropriate, but not bad. There was lobbying at a kind of regional level, not at a national level from France. But Brittany Ferries is a Brittany company. I understand that, and from my perspective, one of my biggest motivations in politics in Jersey is to have better relations with France and Europe, but most particularly France, and we should. Another absurdity is how we bring 90% of our food comes from outside the island. We bring it across 120 miles of water, which is often rough, and is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, when we could be bringing a lot of our food from 40 miles away across calmer water, which is not a busy shipping lane. And so Jersey has baked into itself these inefficiencies in its supply chain, which mean that our supply chains are really taut. There's not much room for maneuver in them at all. Add into that, we have a harbour which is tidal, which really stupidly faces the prevailing wind. So the entrance to our harbour faces the strongest wind and the most frequent wind. It makes Jersey's supply chain, feeding 105,000 people, a very delicate balance. And these are things that I think we need to sort out. We need to deepen the harbour. It should not be tidal. We need to stop that. We need to deepen it. That will cost them hundreds of millions. But, Guernsey's harbour is much better positioned. It's sheltered from the prevailing winds, and it's always got deep water in there. The fact that we can't use Jersey's harbour for hours every day means that when there is a delay, it gets impounded by that harbour being unusable because there's no water in it. We have a supply chain which doesn't make sense in so many ways, and Jersey really should. And I will continue, I hope to be elected. If I'm not elected, though, I will continue to work for Jersey buying at least some of its supplies from Europe and France. Going back to the ferry part, the point I'm trying to make is I really want much stronger relations with France. I spent 4 years as a minister building stronger relations with France. I knew that when the Council of Ministers made the decision to go with DFDS, I knew that would have potentially an impact on our relations with France. So it's not something that I wanted, in the sense that I didn't want our relations with France to be impacted, and with Brittany to be impacted, and with Normandy to be impacted. In the main, I don't think they have. I think there's a bit of bruising, but nothing that can't be moved beyond. And, so that shows as well that the decision around choosing DFDS, when the Council of Ministers made that decision, it wasn't something that was in any way taken lightly. The whole of the government wants stronger relations with France. And the easy thing in that respect would have been to appoint Condor Ferries and just say, go with it. But had we appointed Condor Ferries, that company would have remained in massive debt. It was, even with the restructure, it was going to be, if the Channel Islands went all in, it was going to be under heavy amounts of debt. And we can see now that come the end of the accounts for Brittany Ferries for 2024, they're the most recent set of accounts, show that Condor Ferries was valued at minus £130 million.
Is this kept alive by the government of Guernsey then, you think?
Well, there was a very strange episode in 2023, I think it was, maybe in 2022, when we were, and this happened under the former Minister for Economic Development, now the Chief Minister, Lyndon Farnham. He started an exercise with Guernsey to look at what's the best shape for our ferry services. Should we own our ferries and get an operator in, own our ferries and operate those ferries, or should we, keep it purely commercial and get an owner operator in? And we were meant to be sharing everything about ferries with each other as two islands. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I think I had become minister during that period. We got sent an email one night, basically telling us from Guernsey, telling Jersey that we'll be buying a ferry with Condor tomorrow. And the idea was that it was going to be privately financed on the Guernsey side. But we were like, hold on, we've been working together for a long time, paying for consultants to help us design the way forward. And at the same time, it's clear now that we could see Guernsey had been negotiating with Condor to buy this ferry. That's not operating in good faith. It's a very strange thing to do. And obviously it tied Guernsey to Condor in a way that Jersey wasn't tied. Guernsey likes to own its travel assets. It owns Aurigny. It owns a car ferry too. And actually, as I understand it, it also owns a freight ferry. Jersey doesn't. Now, doesn't like to own these assets.
It's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a really good thing. It gives us much greater flexibility. It means that we're not having to pay out of our own pocket to keep these assets going or to replace these assets.
But then I think the argument would be, for some people, would be like, well, these are very important things for Jersey. What if something goes wrong, if we don't own it? How that works?
I don't think ownership makes it any easier. You still need a crew. You still need to maintain it. You still need the expertise in running ferries or running airlines. We can see that Aurigny cost the government of Guernsey millions of pounds every year. We had Blue Islands. They were operating. They obviously, they did a great job for as long as they could, but obviously financially it didn't work in the end. And I imagine COVID had a lot to do with that. And, we were then able to, Loganair were then able to come in behind Blue Islands and take over those routes, and are now also operating to Paris and Bordeaux, much wider route network. That's not cost Jersey anything. The Blue Islands, not nothing. It cost us £1 million to bring in Loganair as quickly as they came in. But compared to the costs of that Guernsey pays towards Aurigny, it is very little. And it's a one-off cost, and it's gone. And Loganair, we can see, are doing an excellent job, and we're really pleased. So I think Jersey has 105,000 people, 106,000 people. We are a bigger island. So maybe that gives us a commercial a kind of critical mass commercially that enables us to have these operators doing it for us instead of us owning them. I would say, I think, I definitely prefer the Jersey model to the Guernsey model. I think the Guernsey model is something you only do in extremis. So if there is there is nobody else willing to serve your routes, whether it's ferries or air, then yes, you will need to have your own airline and serve them, or your own ferry company and serve them yourselves. But until you're at the point where nobody else is willing to do it, then then you should let them, other commercial operators, do it. And so that exercise with Guernsey came out saying that actually we didn't need to own the ferries. We didn't need to have these assets ourselves. We could get operators in to run them commercially. And the fact that 3 companies entered that first tender process, Irish Ferries, Condor Ferries, and DFDS, did suggest that, or does show that there is great interest in the routes to the Channel Islands.
Yeah, I mean, just for the record, I'm not saying that we should have, own any of these assets or any of these companies, because probably more than so there are more situations where the government runs, services in general a lot worse than a private company would.
Yeah.
Just because of the bureaucracy, because, I don't know, it just works differently. If they're losses, they just don't feel like they are from your own pocket. I don't know. There's just many situations like that.
I completely agree with you. One thing, so I've been Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. It's been wonderful working in my department. I've got some really, really good colleagues in the department, some really good officers. But there's a reality around government in general. It doesn't really understand the world of business. It doesn't really know how to relate to the world of business very well. And government does not act in a commercial way. You can really see that in different areas. And that's one of the reasons why I fully agree with you. That's one of the reasons why I don't think government should be running commercial operations unless it really there is no other choice. Government's not good at it. It doesn't employ the type of people who run businesses. It employs a different type of person, and that's perfectly good. But, government lacks that knowledge and that expertise. So I, as a general rule, would always keep away from governments doing business. That's not their forte.
Who's made the decision in the end?
Yeah. So the decision was made by the Council of Ministers. It was, and it was a recommendation from officers. So, and on top of that, so there was officers, there was a top 4 consultancy firm, there were lawyers, all working together on, assessing the bids, who had the better bid. The recommendation came back from them that DFDS had the better bid for a number of reasons. That then was also looked at by a group of ministers, which included me, the Chief Minister, External Relations, Treasury Minister, Infrastructure Minister, Environment and Planning Minister. A group of ministers then agreed, decided to take that to the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers voted unanimously to support the decision to appoint DFDS. And so it was a government-wide decision. I, though,
you got the blame.
The blame or the credit depends.
Well, yeah, it all depends how you see it. Yeah,
you want to look at.
Well, exactly.
No, but that's, I am a politician who has always been willing to stand up and be counted. I'm not a politician with slopey shoulders who just sits there and pretends that to hide from it all. I stood up and I said that this is what we were doing. It was ultimately in our department, my department, and whilst the decision was a government decision, somebody has to front it, and so I agreed to front it, and that's the way I've always been. There are other politicians who don't stand up and aren't counted in that way. I think it's the least we demand, but I do not like it when the fact that someone stands up to front the decision that has been taken, that then goes into the realm of being very personal, very insulting, very hurtful criticism on social media, absurd. I've got my own trolls on social media. It's quite hideous. It affects your family.
True.
It affects, I've had my family in tears at things that have been said. Jersey is a tiny community, and we cannot afford for that level of political discourse. It's not political discourse. It's insults. It's just rubbish. And often anonymous people doing it. And that's the side of Jersey which needs to stop, because ultimately that level of behavior leads to the stuff we see happening in America. It leads to stuff we see happening in some of the countries around Europe, including the UK, which are moving to the extremes. It's really bad for this island. And we cannot expect people to stand for election if they feel that they are going to have their own kind of personalities, their own families destroyed by political rubbish, just being spoken particularly on social media, by cowards who hide behind anonymous personalities. And so that's been the thing that's been the hardest of all, is seeing that, knowing that. And I don't respond to it because I don't want to dignify it. But, I won't be if I'm not the last that this happens to, then Jersey will slowly lose its democracy as a whole, because people will stop standing for election. And I think, one of the things that's worried me about this election is it looks to me as though there are far few women standing this time. We had lots of women standing last time. And I'm worried that, again, this is because people are looking and saying it's not worth the cost to me and my family. And Jersey needs to move beyond that. We are better than that. And I truly believe that.
But why do you think you've not had other politicians, fully supporting you, saying that, what, Kirsten has done a great job with this, or it wasn't more than once, let's say, is it because the Jersey political space is divided. You know, once the decision was made, everyone was hiding, and you got left with the press and with everything that was in pieces.
I would say once the decision made, everyone went hiding, and I was left holding the baby and you know, looking at the press. That's what happened. But I don't mind that in itself. What I don't like is what comes behind that, which is the nasty, horrendous social media side of it. I don't mind standing there and saying, look, this is what we've done as a government. This is where we're doing. These are the reasons we've done it. Ultimately, the decision to not appoint Condor ferries, we have to go back to. They had acted really badly with regard to Jersey and Guernsey. They had asked us for £40 million out of the blue. They hadn't told us about court action against their ferries. And then when it actually came to the tender process, and if you remember, there's the quite famous episode where we couldn't even tell which corporate entity, was it Brittany Ferries or Condor Ferries, that was bidding for the tender. I mean, you automatically fail a tender, any tender process, if you don't know, if you're not being clear about which company is actually tendering for this. And all the way through, that sort of thing, that sort of inability for that company to be straight and just easy to understand and just direct with us and just tell us what's what, that is ultimately, I think, what cost them the award of the tender, because we need to work with a company that is going to be honest with us, straight with us, not hide behind things. And because ultimately that's where we need to know the food is coming in. And there are operational issues. You know, I've not been happy with the operational issues we've seen with DFDS these last couple of months. You know, the loss of the Caesarea trader, the loss of the tree for jet, you can put it down to, you know, bad luck. And I think there was a large amount of bad luck, but it's also not good enough. You know, they shouldn't be having those episodes taking place, because that has this big knock-on impact. On the plus side, whilst there was significant disruption, this disruption could have been a lot worse. And one of the things we wanted from a ferry company was resilience plans and contingency plans. And they did bring in other ferries to cover over the problems that were caused by the loss of those two vessels. And they did that fairly well, not brilliantly well, but they did that fairly well. And that's, again, from a government perspective, the resilience of the fleet is absolutely paramount. Even when things go wrong, can you still continue sailing ferries to Jersey? That's what we need to know. And to be honest, the last couple of months where their service has been not at the level you want, but the most important thing was the ferries kept sailing. And that is the most important thing. And we kept having the supplies coming in. Because whether it's weather or accidents, as I said at the beginning, Jersey's supply lines are there's not much room for error in those supply chains. And therefore, when things go wrong, we need to know that the damage to the supply chain can be minimized. And that was shown to be the case.
But when there are situations like this, you know, that could affect, you know, what it says in the contract. Well, to be fair, I've not seen the contract, but are there fines? Who's regulating these? You know, how does it work from that point of view? Because I think one of the, I don't know if justified, but probably people's perception is that we have a contract, we paid that amount, you know, we agree on this amount, and then, you know, by the end of, I don't know how many years, it's only after that, you know, prices are changing. If there, let's say, there are issues along the way, the companies will get fined or they get penalties, or I don't know how.
Yeah, exactly. There is a penalty element to the contract. So if they're not hitting their minimum service levels, they can be penalized. There's also, I mean, the main point of the contract is to make sure we get investment in new ferries. Again, you know, I said earlier, Condor were given an opportunity to present proposals for how they would invest in new ferries before we went to any tender process. So a non-competitive opportunity for them, two non-competitive opportunities to put forward proposals how they would invest in new ferries. They did not put forward proposals that showed them investing in any new ferries, just kept saying in partnership with the governments. As we said, we don't want to own these ferries. And so ultimately the contract has regular monitoring. It has monitoring on everything from marketing to finance to port operations to the operations themselves. They are monitored regularly. There is a team of officers, including people, you know, the team in ports, including government officers, sit down with DFDS every 3 months and look through all the different elements of their service. And where there are problems, we can escalate them. And, you know, where they're doing well, we encourage them and ask them to do better. And so that monitoring goes on regularly. The previous contract which was a joke of a contract, I am sorry, the previous contract signed in 2014, Jersey had absolutely no ability to hold Condor to account. So Condor, plenty of times in those 10 years, were not providing the minimum service, but there was nothing that Jersey could do about it. And that was also interesting because that previous contract was only a contract between Jersey and Guernsey. Sorry, apologies. That was only a contract between Jersey and Condor ferries. Guernsey were not a part of that contract. So that was also interesting as well. Guernsey, for 2014 to 2024, 25, didn't have a contract, with, to my knowledge, with Condor ferries at all. So that was also an interesting bit. Jersey was the only contracted party, but our contract was fairly useless. Our contract now has teeth. It has 300 or nearly, I think it's 298 million pounds of investment in new ferries. We can hold them to that. This is an asset the island has. It's a 300 million pound contract. It's an asset. That's something we can use. Some people say to me, "Oh, can we get out of the contract?" Well, you've got to think. You don't want to just throw a 300 million pound contract down the drain. So what we need to do is work with DFDS to make sure that they improve their service where we need it improved. They are doing well in some areas, they're not doing well in other areas, and we need to make sure in the areas where they're not doing well that they improve it. And that's what the team, like I say, it's government, it's ports, and DFDS itself. We need to make sure that we hold them to account and they improve their service.
Now, talking about prices, which I know was some people's frustrations, because I think we moved to, is it right? We moved to dynamic prices?
Condor operated dynamic pricing.
Okay.
So
maybe it was the wrong perception.
We've had dynamic pricing for a while.
Yeah. Okay, cool. But it just feels like, some people are reporting, big fluctuations compared to what it was before. Whether that's true or not, you'll tell us more. But in terms of like what the contract says, can they just do whatever they want from this perspective? Or is there a threshold? How does it work? How can the government protect, from prices going absolutely crazy?
So the contract itself sets, because of dynamic pricing, it's been around for a long time. It does make it much harder to understand where the price is, because you look at the website today, it'll be a different price tomorrow. It was a different price yesterday. That's the same for airlines. So the pricing is broken down into a mean average price. And so that is the average of all the different prices. You've got some prices at £10, some prices at £5. So your mean is £7.50, if you know what I mean. So that tracks the mean average price. So that's one measure. The other measure is that we have a maximum individual price and a minimum individual price. And so the extremes at which that dynamic pricing can flex is limited. It's within tram lines, if you know what I mean. So you have the middle, and then you have the tram lines around which stop them going up and down further. And that's something that, again, if it's seen that those extremes are too wide, then it's the job of the teams that work with DFDS, the government and ports teams that work with DFDS, to make sure that those prices are brought in. And I think we've already done that. We've already asked them to trim them in so that they're not got such high extremes. But so those prices are absolutely tracked, and they set their prices in accordance with the government team that works with them.
So we talked about investment in new boats, but where is that going? Because I've been, I don't know, like right after, I think like almost a year ago, I went with one of the boats that was an older boat. And I think, the plan is to bring new ones in.
Yeah.
Where are we with that? When will that happen?
Yeah.
What's the time horizon?
So I think all the new vessels have to be delivered by 2032. And I think the first one is 2028, 2029, that sort of time. And so we're going to see new vessels coming in a few years' time. That was always the case. You don't get a contract and bring in a new vessel on day one. There is an age to the Tarifa Jet is an older boat. So that's the boat which goes between St. Helier and France. That's is an older boat. I think, that's 20, 25 years old. And that, is there basically waiting to be replaced by the new ferry in 28, 29. The Levante Jet, which is the high speed to the UK, that's, I think, 10 years old, 11 years old, that sort of age. Apologies if I'm a year or two out, but that's a much younger vessel. And that has been just had a refit. More than £1 million has been spent refitting that. So it's now got the proper facilities. It's got entirely new seating on there, a bigger premium cabin. They've invested strongly in that boat. They will invest in Tarifa Jet 2. That obviously had, it was involved in that accident, and so that had to be taken out of the water, and it's had lots of work done on it there. So they do invest in the ferries, even though they're old ferries, but they're on the hook for building us brand new ferries, not buying them from somewhere else, but building us brand new ferries for delivery starting in a few years' time.
And is this in a contract that they will have to use these new ferries here, or they'll be on the paper and they'll probably be moving it to other routes?
That's a really good question, but no, they have to use them on the Jersey routes. Okay. So they have to. They can't just suddenly send them off to Copenhagen for, the Copenhagen, Sweden route or something like this. Yeah. So no, they have to be used on the Jersey routes. It's for investment in our routes.
And do you think that once that happens, let's say in 2029, this ferry gets replaced, the one that goes from Jersey to France gets replaced, the speed will increase? Because that's one of the questions or one of the frustrations some people have, that it's not fast enough. That's an obvious, it's black and white, right? The Condor was faster.
Yeah. It was a bit faster. Yeah. It's not as fast as people are making out. Again,
no.
People's memories.
But it was.
People's memories are quite interesting around.
No, absolutely.
The speed that they used to take place.
Yeah.
So they now, I think they say the maximum time is meant to be 1 hour 55 minutes from here to France. I was on it just 2 weekends ago. I think it came in at 1 hour 45 minutes. My memory, Condor was at best an hour and 30 minutes. So we're talking between 15 minutes and half an hour kind of extra on top of that. I have asked actually, I wanted to double check, why is it slower? One of the reasons is they're only using one ramp in St. Malo at the moment. And so they don't have two ramps. One of the reasons is, as they said, there is no point going faster if you're going to have to wait outside anyway for the ramp to clear before you can get your ramp position. That is one reason. And there is another reason, which is about it burns less fuel. It is more environmentally friendly. It is less costly. So for the sake of kind of, let's say 25 minutes, the cost reduction in that is significant. And that helps keep, the cost down for our ticket prices. And it obviously has an environmental factor. I know it's something that islanders aren't so happy with. And we do keep telling them, DFDS, to improve their speeds. I think Tarifa Jet is coming back in. It's still got, I don't think one of its engines is going to be running fully. So I think it's going to be sticking to that kind of 1 hour 55 maximum time. But we will keep pressure on them, and that's, whoever's the minister next will continue to put pressure on them to reduce their times to France. But there is also, like I say, that jiggling around with the port in St. Malo, because there's only one ramp at the moment until they've finished their refit in St. Malo.
Now, talking about the time slots, another problem was the day trips. Because we chosen DFDS, do you think that the time slots that we had with France were not favoring us much once the decision was made?
In 2025, last year, yes, that was absolutely the case, because obviously Condor ferries had been appointed in Guernsey kind of 3 months earlier. So they were able to go and get slots in St. Malo before whoever was appointed in Jersey could go and get those same slots. And so last year that was the case, but this year it's not the case. So this year, the 7:30 slot is a really good slot for starting the day in St. Malo and leaving. That's the slot that was wanted, and it's the slot that's being given. There is a reality. And so again, one thing, if I can address one thing, there's a rumor goes around, says I was employed by Condor and sacked by Condor. I've never been employed by Condor ferries. I've never been sacked by Condor ferries.
Oh, right.
But what I used to do public relations on behalf of Condor. I worked for an agency and they were a client of mine. And I did that for about 10 years, and I had a really good relationship with Condor. We worked well, and that came to an end, but it came to an end perfectly happily and amicably. There was no bad blood between me and Condor from when I did their PR many years ago. But what it does give me is an insight into the kind of the complaints then and the complaints now, and they are very, very similar. So going back to when I did do their PR, and I think I finished in 2017 or maybe even earlier, 2016 or 2015, there was often complaints about the length of day trips in St. Malo and the number of day trips that could be made available. And so why have we got the same complaints now and same complaints then? And again, this comes down to things like tidal restrictions. So Jersey's port can only operate at certain times. It comes down to the fact that we start the day in France. So there is always a balance. Jersey can either get the economic benefit of bringing tourists to Jersey, including day trippers, and there are tens of thousands of day trippers, or it can lose that economic benefit and get better day trips in France. But that would mean starting the boat in St Helier. And so Jersey, it's a balance. Jersey doesn't get to have both. It can't have the full economic benefit of visitors to its shores and the benefit of islanders having day trippers. There is a compromise to be made. Something's got to give. And so it is interesting. And I did ask DFDS for the stats before coming into here. So last year, I think they had 37 day trips to St Malo. This year, they've got 90 day trips to St Malo. And they've also created a 24-hour vote, so you can go overnight for the same price as a day trip. And I think that's been very popular as well. But they have 90 day trips this year, which is more than the 37 they had last year. And it's not because of slot times.
And how do you see the tourist industry being impacted, by this ferry situation for the past year, since the DFDS?
Yeah.
Was it positively? Was it negatively? I think there were some recent reports saying that, well, this whole situation with, we had Blue Islands, we had this, it wasn't a great mix of...
But last year was a tough year, and I really feel for hoteliers and restaurant owners, the hospitality sector. But I've worked really closely with the hospitality sector throughout my 4 years as minister. And, the sector itself, I got to praise them for their forbearance, for their patience. Last year was a year of transition, there's no doubt. We transitioned to a new ferry operator in circumstances that nobody wanted, that second tender process having to take place and so on. But we also lost Blue Islands, which then threw in another spanner in the works and created more uncertainty around bookings to the Channel Islands and Jersey particularly. 2026 is a different situation. We've got a confirmed ferry operator and we've got Loganair running the regional air links. The result of that is that we are seeing many more bookings taking place. I was hoping to check just before this, because today is May the 1st, I was hoping to check what the April visitor figures had been, but I hadn't received the confirmation before I came in here. But as of the end of March, we had seen significant increase in ferry arrivals, and we'd also seen significant increase in air arrivals. The year ahead, every year for forward bookings for hotels, every month of the year this year is up on last year, except May, the last time I checked. May was down 1%, but every other month was up between 2 and 5%. So we're having a good, we're set for a good tourism year, as long as events in the Middle East don't end up restricting aviation fuel and the supply of aviation fuel, because if that happens, that's going to have an impact on our tourist season again. But sadly, that's, out of Jersey's control. But we are set for a good tourism season as we are. Bookings, I think DFDS have booked 160,000 people so far for this year, which far outweighs previously. Obviously, they're still bringing bookings in. KLM are bringing tourists in from the Netherlands. We've got Loganair bringing tourists in from France as well as from the UK. And we've got a brilliant deal with Jet2 flying to the UK. Jet2 have committed to increasing the number of passengers they bring to Jersey by huge, by kind of 50% every year for the next 2 or 3 years. And so Jersey is really in the kind of people's sights as a tourist destination. And that's something which I think the transition year of last year was all about, trying to get everything in place so that we could move forward. And
a year of sacrifice almost.
In a sense, your words, not mine, but I hear what you're saying. It was, sometimes you've got to do those transitions. And I think we're in a much better place going forward. And as long as this Middle East situation doesn't, throw a spanner in the works, we should have a much better tourism season the year ahead.
How is the freight situation now? Because obviously that's impacting us all. Well, the whole thing is, as an island, everything that's
everything comes in via freight. This is something, I'll go back to what I said earlier. We've got to have 2 supply routes to Jersey. It's absurd that we have 1 supply route to Jersey.
What's stopping us?
Well, ultimately, it's really hard. Supply chains get formed and then they take a lot to change, if you know what I mean. That's ultimately, there's a lot of inertia around supply chains.
If you get 4 more years or 3 more years, what would you change, to make this happen?
So I think one of the most important things we could do to get the second supply chain is we do need to deliver a new supermarket in the island, and that supermarket would ideally use the southern supply route. As opposed to
something from France, for example.
Something from France. Now, we did come close. There was a supermarket that were interested. They were actually in negotiations to buy land in Jersey, but they were put off by the uncertainty around the planning process. And so, that was a real disappointment to me. But there were conversations going on today with other supermarkets, and hopefully they will, the government this isn't government negotiations. These are private landowners negotiating with supermarkets,
and supermarkets are private
and they're
entities,
private companies.
So they decide.
You can't force them. You can't put a gun to their head.
True. I guess
them
it's lobbying and
I think
ensuring that they have the right, I don't even know, situation.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way.
Exactly.
You don't make it complicated for them to
it's
come
commercial
here.
decisions, and we've got to make it as simple as possible for them to come here. There's no question. And that means changing things in planning to make that happen. I think we should do that. So I think a big supermarket or similar type of business that would import from France would be a huge benefit to us. But similarly, the hospital build, I'm hoping that we'll use as much of the southern supply route to bring in goods for the hospital build as well. That will make a big change. And I also think one of the things that we can do to help both our local farmers and producers and also those in Brittany and Normandy is if we were to have a depot in Jersey that consolidates goods from businesses and farms in France, in Normandy and Brittany and in Jersey, then that would be better for our supermarkets who are here. Supermarkets want to deal with as few suppliers as possible, because there's a lot of admin, another invoice, another purchase order, etc. So if you had one business in Jersey that's that's stocking both Jersey produce from different smallholders and farmers in Jersey, and also from the Brittany and Normandy regions, then they can sell on to the supermarkets in Jersey. That would have a big impact on the southern supply chain as well. There's a really good food security report done by Haifa Consulting, which my department commissioned, which really goes into that in great length and does talk about how we can improve the supply of local food and also supply from the local region around us. Because again, a vegetable from Brittany is traveling a lot less than a vegetable from the north of Yorkshire. So there's an environmental benefit too. But from my perspective, we have a lack of resilience because we have one supply route, that's to the north. Absurdly, that supply route is the most difficult supply route for us to operate because it is bringing in goods from over 100 miles away across often rough water, when we've got a port in St. Malo which wants the business. This is the other thing. St. Malo has been losing business to other ports around it. St. Malo needs the business and it has space. We could have depots there which are supplying Jersey from St. Malo, and that's something I'd love to see happen. And if I was to remain in this job as Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, that's something I'd work strongly on. But that's not me pitching for the job. That's just saying one of the things I would continue to work on.
Yeah, but so this very situation obviously is something that we get to or experience once every 20 years or so. So it's not something that we deal with every day. Now, being through that process, who knows, you might go for another one, you might not.
Yeah.
It's just a long time till we get there. Knowing what you want, knowing what you now know, would you do anything differently?
Yes, but it's probably not things I should say on here. I think
probably not doing it with Guernsey.
So I think there was an issue doing it with Guernsey. I think there was, and there would be. I think we should have seen the warning signs around the purchase of that ferry. I think we should have understood that we needed perhaps some cast iron guarantees that Guernsey would talk after the process had finished, because ultimately that was the real problem. This failure, this not wanting to talk or not wanting to talk in any way, because the official line, I remember this, it's stuck in my head. Oh, we're happy to talk, but we're not going to change our minds. That was what they said. And so officially they can say we were happy to talk, but of course they had no desire, they were not going to change. So what's the point of talking to someone who's not willing to negotiate? And so, we need to know in the future, and this is where Channel Island cooperation can be difficult. We are two separate jurisdictions. You started this whole session by saying, how close we are together. We are, but we're not. Ultimately, we are two islands. I want us to work much more closely together, but there are different views on things, whether it's ownership of travel assets or not wanting GST, in Guernsey, that is, as opposed to here. There are two completely separate political views. Just because we speak the same language.
All big egos. Could be.
Just because we speak the same language doesn't, and we live on islands close to each other, doesn't mean we're always thinking the same. And that's what I've learned. It's wrong for us to think we're thinking the same. So I think a lot of work, perhaps we could still go and do a pan-Channel Island bid in the future. But I think a lot of work should be done in beforehand to try to make sure that both islands are in the same place and thinking along the same lines. Jersey was much more put off by the level of debt that Condor held than Guernsey was. So there was a fundamental difference in how they assessed both sides. We weren't happy about, we felt that demands for £40 million, ships having court orders against them, these were big, for us in Jersey, big red warning flags. The level of debt, if you work it out, just back of a fag packet kind of debt, they said it's negative £130 million in 2024. I think it was even more than that in 2023, much more debt at that point. That works out over a 20-year period. To servicing that debt, we're going to be like £1 million a year. That's just gone on servicing debt. So your passenger fares are just going into servicing the debt. We didn't like that. We didn't want a ferry company that was saddled with large debt. Had we chosen Condor Ferries, even at the end of the second tender process, and then obviously with Guernsey, we'd have had the same operator, Condor would have still had large amounts of debt, because one of the reasons Condor's removed a lot of its debt is when it went to Guernsey only, it sold some of its vessels. And so that was able to repay some of the debt. Those sales of vessels would not have taken place had we been together, as one operator for the Channel Islands. And so, by choosing DFDS, it enabled Condor, and this is good, I'm pleased for Condor, enabled Condor to pay down a large part of its debt. And that was good for them, but wouldn't have been a benefit that we'd have seen in the same way if Jersey had gone in with that choice as well.
Yeah, I mean, you are a great communicator. There's no question about it.
It doesn't feel like
your
it sometimes.
Your career was kind of like built on that. But what I realize, sometimes it doesn't really matter what the truth is. It's just how people perceive the truth. So in this situation, you've seen like the one that has to take the blame. You're kind of dealing with that now. Do you think that this will end your political career?
I couldn't tell you. I hope not, because I've got a lot more to offer, and I've done a lot more than the ferries. I mean, if I'm being egotistical, arrogant, you could say, I've done a lot more in my 4 years than many ministers do in many more than 4 years. They have more than 4 years, and I'd say I've done a lot more than many ministers. And so I don't like the idea of being judged just on the ferry thing. One of the reasons for that is because it wasn't just me. There was a whole load, I had one minister who, before the vote of confidence, he was in scrutiny. He was with me when we went to get the contingency vessel sorted out. And
he wasn't with you after that.
And he was afterwards. He was on the team, the whole way through. So it was a team of ministers, and it was ultimately, as I said, the Council of Ministers. So I don't like getting the blame for something which was a shared responsibility. I don't like that. But as I said, I'm willing to stand up and be counted, and I always want to stand up and be counted. But I also want things like the fact that we have turned agriculture around, absolutely turned it around. If I hadn't intervened the way I had, and I had fantastic civil servants working with me on this, agriculture would be dead by now. That would mean the shape of our island would be changing. We would be losing the landscapes that we have around us. We would be losing any element of food security that you have from locally owned, locally produced food. Tourism, I've invested more in tourism through my department than has ever been invested in tourism since ministerial government began. Visit Jersey for the last 2 years has had £7 million a year, which I still think is not enough, but it's had £7 million a year. Before then, it was only getting less than £5 million a year. We've also invested in the Better Business Support Scheme. I know that somebody recently has come out saying, a former colleague of mine has come out saying, oh, the Better Business Support Package is terrible. The Better Business Support Package is doing really good work, because one of the things we have in Jersey is a reticence amongst businesses to reinvest in themselves. We need businesses to reinvest in themselves, but they weren't doing it. We can't fully understand the reasons why, but we need them to. The Better Business Support Package has stimulated much more investment than the value of the package itself. So for every pound that the government invested, the private businesses were investing £1.40 and above. So we have stimulated business investment in Jersey. That's going to have some really good long-term impacts on both productivity, but also just the way the island feels, because hotels have used it to invest, office businesses have used it to invest, IT businesses have used it to invest. All sorts of businesses have used, charities have used the Better Business Support Package to invest in themselves. That stimulated investment in Jersey's economy. My focus has always been on making sure that we get the long-term things sorted, because Jersey was kind of wandering down a road where it was going to hit a brick wall in many different areas, because it wasn't sorting out these basic things. For 30 years, we haven't invested in our infrastructure properly. We are now finally doing that. The one thing I think as I've said before, that isn't really happening at the moment is the idea of deepening the harbour. That's something I think we really need to do, and sheltering it more from the southwesterly winds. But those are big projects, they're long projects, and they'll take a long time to get agreement on. But we have turned a corner in terms of Jersey's economy. I speak to people in business, they know, and they say to me that it feels like Jersey's open for business. We're attracting technology businesses from all around the world. I've had technology businesses from the US approach me saying, we're interested in looking at Jersey. Can tell us more about Jersey. That's not us approaching them, that's them approaching us. We've got retailers who are interested in Jersey, not just supermarkets, but high street retailers who are interested in Jersey. One of the things we lack is shops of a big enough space. You think about the high street in St Helier, you've got what is New Look, Flannels, and the Boots building, and then obviously the two department stores, but we'll take them out because they're department stores. They're pretty much the only large area of retail spaces we have in Jersey. If you're some of the big brand names that Jersey people would love to see in Jersey, that is really challenging, because they like to have a minimum space. And we have shops which are really quite small, but they're still talking to us because they see the value of being in Jersey. They know that despite being only 100,000 people, we do buy a lot of goods locally. We have very low crime rates, so they lose a lot less in shoplifting. We have very low business rates. It costs a lot less to be a business in Jersey on the high street in terms of rates than it does in the UK, where their business rates are much higher. So we have a lot of interest. And sometimes that interest comes off, sometimes it doesn't come off. But what we mustn't do is get taken up by a world of pessimism, because if we project pessimism, no one's going to be very interested in Jersey. And right now, I think we're really starting to see that change. And I think we're going to see some optimism coming back in, because I think we'll start seeing the investments that people are making in Jersey paying off. Somebody recently said to me, all the scaffolding on the high street, it looks awful. I agree, scaffolding never looks good. But what it tells you is that those business owners are investing in their properties and in their businesses. And that's something we should be really pleased with, because once scaffolding comes down, you're going to have brand new shops and brand new restaurants on the high street. Once Broad Street is complete, you're going to have a really beautiful pedestrian area, which is going to be, looking much nicer and make Jersey much more appealing as a tourist area. We do have to sort out the Les Sablons site, which is privately owned, but that empty space needs to be filled.
Touching on scaffolding is not something that I was
planning
to talk about, but yes. So one of my colleagues, born in Jersey, he's like 70. He was saying that, well, I don't know if this is true or not. He was saying that, like back in his time, you were not allowed to have scaffolding during the tourist season. Is that true?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's
is this
completely
still the case?
No. So I don't know when the regulations changed, but it was the case in the 60s and 70s that you couldn't put scaffolding up during the tourist season. And actually, there was a conversation I had right before coming in here. Somebody else brought that up. Part of me says, yes, we should go back to that. That'll make it much nicer for tourists. But actually, when you then unpack the implications of doing that, you realize what that would do would then mean that construction can only happen in the winter months. So you'd be trying to squeeze all of your construction into the autumn and winter months. And you would then have a spike in prices for things like scaffolding during that time.
It's also a horrible time to construct anything.
And it's all, yeah, it's
That's
also,
true.
well, that's it. And so what you would do is you would put up the price of construction significantly in Jersey if you were to restrict scaffolding to only being during the winter and autumn months. And so, you know, we have a problem with cost of construction in Jersey. We don't want to exacerbate it anymore by restricting the use of scaffolding. But it was something that was the case in the past.
Oh, okay, cool. I think, like, this is my honest opinion about this whole conversation with the DFDS. Yeah, it was a complicated situation. You know, it's not something, as I said, you're dealing with on daily basis. I can only imagine you got to be surrounded by a lot of specialists, and I hope you did.
We were lots
yes.
of specialists involved.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So, because it's always like you don't know what you don't know, so you
Yeah.
need people from outside just to
That's
make
right.
sure that you're choosing the right thing. But what I think was one of the problems, it wasn't probably communicated as well or as often, or I just feel like probably that was one of the issues as well.
I think you're right. And it's actually a criticism I get told a lot. And it's
Yeah.
probably the one where I get most defensive, because at the time it felt like I was doing television calls constantly. You know, I was constantly there in front of ITV.
But what I
constantly in
would
front of
say, and
BBC.
not through those channels, like
Yeah.
what I would have done, you know, and I'm by no means, you know, the best at this, but I would have used my channels and just be like, you know, these are the problems, you know, just use my Facebook or my Instagram or these channels to do it that way.
I think you're right. I think there's something funny about Facebook, or the social media channels, because they're so very personal. And I've got
Because
to
you
admit,
could have
personally,
leveraged these properly, because you are a great communicator. That's what I'm saying.
I think I need to use social media more, but probably more in this sort of way, like video, podcast, that
or
sort of thing.
live, you know, because then live feels like
live,
feels
right.
genuine as
You're
well.
right. I hope to do some during the election as well, because what I would say is one of the reasons why I backed away from social media was I used to be quite a heavy Twitter user. But then as I got further into politics, I realized trying to put across the kind of complexities of any discussion, and any discussion is complex, in kind of, you know, however many characters.
Very basic terms. as
Really
well.
basic. It just doesn't work. And, you know, people come in and say, we should have no scaffolding during the summer months. We should go back to that. And you sit and try and say, well, actually, if we did that, then that would mean all the construction would happen at one time a year, which would put the costs up, and you'd have scaffolding shortages and all this. It gets lost, and people don't, you know, don't listen.
Yeah.
And they're not formats. The written part of social media is not a good format for political discussion, proper political
Or to
discussion.
stick, you know, like they don't stick as well in people's minds.
Yes, and it doesn't. And it takes a long time to do, you know, to get.
Or sometimes the solution is, you know, because I see it with social media.
Yeah.
I'm in that, you know, in daily basis. You do it in text, you do it in video, you do it in imagery.
Yeah.
But there's no one size fits all. You know, you find people in different places.
Totally, that's true. But you've also got to have the time for it.
Very true.
You know, I won't lie. It's been really busy these 4 years. Really busy these 4 years. I've also got 3 parishes to represent and keep in touch with, and I've also got a family that I have. You know, I want to be a good dad. It's really that simple. And so social media actually can then be really slow and time, especially when you're doing it, you know, by text. It can take a very long time, especially that thing that always stuck to my head, because my background is languages, you know, kind of academically. That's what I love. I love languages. And but it means that I see a lot in the written word. And so I can sit there, is that the right word? Or is this right? Is this going to, you know, have I written something that's ambiguous?
Well,
and you begin to overthink it. And you're, if I write it this way, will they start having a go at me because of this? And actually, when you look at Hollywood celebrities or, politicians in big countries, and you see sometimes how they're pilloried for getting one word
Wrong.
a bit loose or a bit wrong. They're going, this is where I think social media fails, because some people, I'm thinking of Timothy Chalamet right now and his comments about ballet and opera and theatre. What he said was not in any way bad, and yet he had months and months of pain because of what he said. Had he said it a slightly different way, the same meaning but a different way, maybe he would have got less hassle. But it was just the phrasing of what he said sent him down a bad road, really, unfortunately. And that can't be the case. You can't continue to do that and all the time. And so, but I think video and podcasts are better, in that sense, because it's more immediate, rather than sitting there wondering if you've typed the right word or not. I do agree. I do think there hasn't been enough communication, or the right kind of communication, around the Ferry situation. Partly as well, I'd say, is because I've not wanted to throw anybody under a bus. I've not wanted to have a go at Guernsey. I've not wanted to have a go at Condor or Brittany Ferries. I've been trying to be, I think people would say, statesman-like, if you know what I mean. And that I may not have come across that way, but I haven't wanted to inflame any arguments, that sort of thing. Throughout the whole process, that first process particularly, the threat of court cases against us was huge. That was one of the reasons why it's difficult to explain ourselves, and the fact that we were then, once the decision was made, were then taken to court, but won that court case, showed that it was right to be careful on how we said what we said. And sometimes this is what happens. Your duty to the state of Jersey can be different, it can be at odds with your desire to want to communicate the whole thing. But we were under threat of court action at any time. And so we had to navigate that very carefully. And the fact that we did have a court case showed that we were right to be aware of that threat. But by being careful in what we said, it meant that, we were absolutely fine and we won that court case. So there are many reasons which hinder communication, but I do take it as a genuine thing. And I'm sorry that I haven't communicated properly. I am, because I like to think of myself as a decent communicator, but on this one, perhaps I haven't done it as well as I could. Or other ministers as well, perhaps they could have weighed in a little bit too.
True. Kirsten, thank you for this conversation. I hope people got some clarity. I hope they got valuable information about what happened with the DFDS. And I'm sure you'll have people asking a lot more questions, till the elections happen. And best of luck with the elections. And who knows, we'll have another one at some point.
Thank you. Whether I'm elected or not, but I'd like to do more podcasts, because even if I'm not elected, I don't think I'll be a voice that goes away.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.